First, I just want to say I am so happy to be here. I think so often this work and this advocacy is so challenging, and there are so many setbacks and so many forces working against us that it is incredibly uplifting and encouraging to be in the presence of other people who are doing this work, seeing some success and continuing to keep up the good fight. So thank you hugely to ACSOL and to Janice for bringing us all together. And I appreciate you joining us for this breakout session. My name is Adele Nicholas. I'm the Executive Director of Illinois Voices for Reform, which is the Illinois organization that advocates for the elimination of public conviction registries and the reform of counterproductive sex offense laws and policies. Before taking on that role, I was on Janice's board for ACSOL, and I'm also a civil rights lawyer who devotes a substantial amount of my practice to challenging these counterproductive and harmful sex offense laws and policies. I am joined on this session today by the wonderful powerhouse leader of the Texas organization, Mary Sue Molnar. Mary Sue is the founder and executive director of Texas Voices for Reason and Justice, and she's also the mother of a registered citizen. She lives in San Antonio, but connects with registered members and their families across the state of Texas. No small task, given how large Texas is. Mary Sue has also served on the board of directors for NARSOL, the National Association for Rational Sex Offense Laws, and the National Center for Reason and Justice. We're here today to tell you a little bit about what's happening in our states, how our organizations are helping to contribute to this fight, to change the tide and start reversing the course of these destructive laws that we are all affected by and have loved ones who are affected by. Hopefully, in short order, we'll also be joined by Amber Vlangas, who is a crime survivor and a member of a registry impacted family. She's currently the executive director of the Restorative Action Alliance, which is a regional advocacy group that serves New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. Okay, so Mary Sue and I will get started, and hopefully Amber will be with us shortly.
Amber's on. I see Amber.
Wonderful. Where is Amber? Let's see if I can get, thank you, Amber. I'm going to add your pin here. Okay, great. We're all here. So let's get started having each of us say a little bit about what are currently the greatest challenges that registrants are facing in our respective states that we serve. Let's start with Mary Sue.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me, Janice. Love you, miss you, and hope to see you soon. So here in Texas, we have close to 100,000 people on the registry. So we've got quite a job ahead of us. And their challenges range from everything to from housing to employment to the isolation. Everyone here is public. There is no private registry depending on risk levels or the crime you committed. Everybody's on the public registry, everyone. So there's a lot of challenges. I would say mostly in the last few years for the newer guys or ladies coming out of prison or jail, it's the residency restrictions. I mean, it's getting really bad over here. It's getting close to like Florida, where there's just nowhere to live. So Texas doesn't have a statewide residency restriction ordinance, but they allow individual cities and counties to enact their own. So we're having major problems with that, trying to attack all these city ordinances, trying to stop them, trying to stop the legislators from passing more laws, trying to get an interim study so that they can actually have the research in writing. It is so overwhelming. I mean, there's so many issues that when you write them all down, you just don't even know where to go. So I just keep telling myself and then our members, put one foot in front of the other and let's work on the next best thing. And let's just keep moving forward. Don't look at everything as a whole because it's too overwhelming. One step at a time, one issue at a time. Everybody split up, take a different issue and let's go for it, and It is overwhelming here. I really feel for the people on the registry. It's just, there's no way off. Um, Hotel California, easy to get on, but no way to get out. So I'll pass it back to Amber.
So I really appreciate again to be invited here as well, and I want to echo a little bit of what Mary Sue said. We're doing work in several different states, so we can kind of talk about the different states. In New York, we're working with about 44,000 that are on the registry, and then we have about 6,000 in Connecticut and around 16,000 in New Jersey. We see all sorts of different challenges. I would say in New York, the residency restrictions around individuals who are on parole, who are often held past their release dates, is a very significant issue. And in Connecticut, what we're really impacted by is that everybody is on the public registry and there is no path off of the registry. So those are the things that we're really looking at, trying to change. But it really comes down to that being able to have a stable life, right? That employment, that being able to have somewhere to live. In Connecticut, we see proximity restrictions. They're not necessarily the residency restrictions, but you can't be standing in a certain place or enter a library in certain towns. And those are local ordinances that we have to kind of work step by step to tear down.
I would say we have many of the same issues here in Illinois. Echoing what Amber said about parole residency restrictions, that's a huge problem faced by folks in Illinois. We have a very similar issue here where people finish their sentences of incarceration but aren't able to be released from prison unless they can obtain an approved place to live. And overlapping state laws, Department of Corrections policies, and parole rules make it virtually impossible for a lot of folks, especially those without a lot of money, to find compliant housing. And so we also have long been working on the issue of trying to help people get out of prison. We have lifetime registration here for almost every offense with no route for relief. We also have a terrible system of labeling where the Illinois legislature decided to call almost every sex offense, every person convicted of almost any sex offense, a quote, sexual predator. And that label is applied on a public registry to virtually everyone who has to register here in the state of Illinois, which has a cascade of negative consequences, including great difficulty finding landlords who are willing to work with you and rent to you, as well as difficulty with finding and securing employment, along with the public condemnation in a program that comes with such a defamatory and horrible label. So I'd say those are a couple of the biggest challenges that people face. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the legislative landscape in each of our states. In particular, I'm interested to know, we know that state laws have been kind of an escalating arms race. For a long time, state lawmakers were scoring points by proposing and passing new restrictions that apply to people who are on registries, without any real regard to whether those restrictions would actually improve public safety. But we've had constantly escalating new restrictions in many states, including Illinois, for a long time. So first, let's talk about whether that's still happening in your state, whether lawmakers are proposing and seeking to pass new laws and new restrictions that apply to this population. I'll go to Mary Sue first.
Yeah, we've been dealing with that a lot. We deal with that every session. Last session and the session before, there was a bill that would allow counties to impose residency restrictions. That means that we have so many people that move outside of city limits because there's nowhere to live in the city, and they move outside of the city limits into a county. So these bills that were proposed last session and the session before would allow the county commissioners to impose residency and proximity restrictions. We killed those bills both sessions in a row. And the way that we kill them is by not, so this is what we do here. Let's say, all of our members, which is about 700 of us, they know that we're going to testify against a bill. So we request that they join us in a Zoom meeting, and we want to see who wants to testify. So let's say, honestly, some people really shouldn't testify. So we kind of pick and choose a different variety of people, and then we break it up and we say, okay, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? And we make sure that everybody says something different. One person might tell their story and the hardships that they face and their children. Another person might talk about the research. Another person would, talk about something else. So we try to get all of the information out there in our testimonies, and we don't want to repeat each other. And there is so much info that this is the way we do it. We divvy it up between everyone who wants to testify. Now, we did kill that bill last session and the session before, but we know it's going to be back again. So that's why we're calling for an interim study. We'd love to have something in writing, something that they really studied, that we can say, look, you guys studied this, and this is what the study says. But, it is such a backroom deal-making place when you're at the Capitol. Everything is you help me, I'll help you. And every time a legislator votes for or against a bill, they're thinking about their constituents and whether they're going to get voted in or not. So we've always got to come up with a common sense reason, some way that they can answer to their constituents and say, I voted against this bill, or I voted for this bill because. Give them something other than because it's not fair to these people, or because, that they don't care. We've got to give them something to take back to their constituents. So we try and come up with different things for different bills that, will sound good for them to say to their constituents and save face so that they can get those votes. But it is a tough game to play up there, especially, I would say that most of our members, they're such good people, and they're so honest, and they're so open, and they're so honorable. And then you get up there and you walk in the doors and you're entering a whole different world. So it's really a challenge working with the legislators, but it has to be done. You have to do it if you want to stop these bad bills and if you want to educate people. So that's how it goes here in Texas. Amber, to you.
So I will also say that it's a tough game. We're a fairly new organization founded in 2020, so we have the most experience in the state of Connecticut, and we are developing further strategies in New York. But the landscape in Connecticut is a little bit more friendly. There are conversations that have been going on for a long time. There has been a study done that was mandated by the legislature in actually 2015. So I guess friendly is the wrong word. It's friendly comparatively. So, we really haven't gotten any changes made, but at least the awareness is there and the conversations are happening. In New York, one of the things that we see is, we're always on the offensive, right? And that's in any state, because we're part of a group that gets put into a whole labeled group that's just outside of the reach of the Constitution. And so, unlike any other group, we find ourselves just having to kill things as opposed to bring bills that would actually improve people's lives. We're just trying to like minimize the damage. So I know that's a challenge in every state. And then one of the things that we saw in New York is there was amazing work being done around parole reform with a bill called Less is More. And as we're building capacity, we just didn't yet have the capacity to have the boots on the ground to be standing there to avoid a carve out. So that's what we see a lot of, is that all of these great bills that would really improve people's lives, whether it's around parole, whether it's probation, whether it's sentencing reform, voting rights, all of those things, we also have to be there to stand in the gap to say, no, don't carve us out. And so it's really challenging to have the capacity, especially for us as a new organization. We're continuing to build that capacity as we grow, but it's really important for everyone to know, with lived experience or who cares about these issues, that we have to have those boots on the ground, talking to legislators, testifying like Mary Sue was mentioning, and really building that capacity in terms of training people on how to do this. This is a hard thing to do. So that's kind of the landscape here. We see we're doing a lot of offense. We're doing a lot of, trying to avoid carve outs to things like clean slate and parole reform and things like that. Over to you, Adele.
Well said. I think that that's always an issue with what we work on, which is that there are broader movements for criminal justice reform. And it's very easy for the population that we care about and represent to be carved out of those positive changes. Something fairly similar happened here, which was there was a bill passed to reform the length of time people would have to spend on supervised release, which is our form of parole here in Illinois. And the worst parole sentence we have here in Illinois applies only to a subset of people who are required to register. And of course, no changes were made to that particularly terrible type of supervision time. I would say, as a more general matter, after many years of kind of an escalating of these restrictions being passed every session, there is a bit of an armistice in the Illinois legislature, where there's been a realization that the restrictions are quite severe, oftentimes untenably so. And there aren't great efforts being made to pass new additional restrictions. We see a few things being proposed, but there's no real serious effort put behind passing new restrictions or adding additional residency or presence restrictions, in part because Illinois already has enormously difficult laws to comply with, but at least we don't see lawmakers trying to pass new ones at this time, or at least not seriously trying to pass them. Let's talk about anything positive happening in your states in terms of legislation. What are you advocating for? And do you have any victories to report on the legislative front? Mary Sue?
There's not a lot of positive over here. We're like Amber. We're always on the defensive. The one victory that we did have, which was several years ago, but it was a good victory. And I think it's the way that we got that victory is pretty important for people who are trying to get legislation passed. It used to be that Texas put place of employment information on the public registry. So when you'd go to someone's page, it would say employment, then it would say AutoZone, and it would give the address. So people were losing their jobs right and left. There were news crews following people to work, just for a ridiculous, scary news story. And all these things were happening, and we just really felt like we needed place of employment to be off the registry. So we did get a bill filed, didn't make it the first session. The second session, we had a legislator who filed it again for us. I believe what got that through, I mean, we had we had people go up and talk about how they had lost their jobs and things like that. But I believe what got it through is the Texas Association of Business, they are big donors to the political arena. They backed the bill. They said our business owners should be able to hire whoever they want, and they shouldn't have their name listed on the public registry. So once they backed the bill, then it was pushed forward as this is a bill supported by the Texas Association of Business. And we were out of it at that point. We have to take our lead from the legislator. And the legislator said, step back. We don't need testifiers. We don't, and that's exactly what we did. And that's how we got the bill passed. And a couple of months later in September, all of that information came off the registry. I don't doubt that at some point another bill will be filed wanting to put it back on. So it is always a watch and see. And, we try to talk to as many legislators as we can off session. There are 150 state representatives here and 31 senators. So it's pretty tough to get around to all of them. But, that's what we attempt to do. But yeah, haven't had a whole lot of successes except the killing of bills. And one or two, we had a good parole bill that passed at one point. And other than that, that's our two successes in the legislature. But, don't count us out. Bring it on. We're still going to move forward. And over to you, girlfriend.
So I would say in terms of success, we have to look at success in the context of all of the work that has been done. So when you look at, success in the legislature or on the legislative advocacy side, it's not always, getting a bill through. It's moving the mark and the conversations. So when I think about the successes, killing those bills, absolutely a success. Again, like I said, we have the most experience in Connecticut, and we've been for multiple sessions discussing and having, move in different stages of the process, a bill to move from a conviction-based registry to a tiered registry in a way that was very inequitable and would have the wrong people making the assessments that had the potential to really bolster the registry, put more people on higher levels, just the way that the language was written. So we had great efforts on the part of many advocates and many people with lived experience that basically have killed that idea, which was put forth through our sentencing commission that we have here in Connecticut. And now the sentencing commission is in the process of really revising that to not really necessarily worry about this whole idea of this review board that would assess risk in a way that really was not favorable for registrants, and is looking at a path off the registry. The conversation is around whether it's fully retroactive or we carve out the people who are currently on the registry and it's just prospective. So that's going to be our fight in the next legislative session to really keep them having that conversation about making it fully retroactive, because it was fine when we thought it was the solution and that the registry wasn't harmful. Now we're acknowledging that the registry is harmful and we can't make that we can't repair the harm by making it retroactive. We can only, say, oh, let's do better moving forward. But all those people currently on the registry, they have no path off. That's not acceptable to us. And so that's what we're going to be working on. So we see that as a success, kind of changing the narrative or the conversation in the legislature to have bills being proposed that make a little bit more sense. Over to you, Adele.
Thanks. I'm fairly new to this world. I've just taken on this role within the past few months. And one of the first people I turned to was Mary Sue, because we know that she has just been active in this world and rallying the forces towards it for a long time with great success. So I hope to continue to learn from folks like Mary Sue and Janice and Amber as we go forward trying to work on legislation in our state. I'd say that from our state's perspective, there's two legislative priorities that we hope to work on. One is that our state has a residency banishment zones around schools, playgrounds, and daycares of 500 feet. And while 500 feet is certainly not as bad as some other state restrictions, in urban areas, it's enormously restrictive, particularly because the statute also includes home daycares, which can be established anywhere inside any private residence if someone decides to get a license to operate a home daycare. And perhaps the worst aspect of Illinois law in this respect is that there is no grandfathering in of existing residences. So someone might establish a residence that complies with all of the laws and restrictions, but if someone opens a home daycare near them, their residence is illegal and they have to move out or face potential felony prosecution. So there has been a bill filed that will hopefully grandfather in existing residences and also seeks to reduce the residential banishment zones to 250 feet from the current 500. It has received some support in the last session. Ultimately, it didn't pass out of committee, but that doesn't mean that the fight is over or that the advocacy is over. We had a lot of good meetings with lawmakers to start educating them about this issue, and we're in this advocacy for the long haul. So we want to continue supporting that. And then we just had our board meeting the other night to talk about what our priorities and what we might want to work on in the future. And one thing that I think everyone in our group is excited to work on is something that Amber also mentioned, which is path off. There being some limitation to how long folks have to remain on a public registry. I think all of our work is trying to aim at elimination of registries because they are harmful, they do not advance public safety, and they cause immense suffering that is avoidable. But what that looks like in practice is incremental change that gives people the opportunity to get off the registry and lead positive, productive lives and prove themselves after having been held accountable. And so something we want to try to harness is the new model penal code recommendations that Janice referenced in her session, which one takes registries private. If they are to exist at all, they shouldn't be accessible to the public. And two, sets a maximum amount of time that someone has to stay on a registry. So if you're on a registry for 15 years and you haven't committed a new criminal offense, that should really be the end of it at the absolute upper limit. So we're excited to try to work on educating our lawmakers about that and moving the ball forward in that respect going forward. All right, let's change gears a little bit to litigation. I think that there's limitations to both sides of this coin. There's limitations to what can be accomplished by talking to lawmakers who oftentimes have every political incentive to harm the population that we represent. There's also limitations to what can be accomplished through the courts. But let's talk a little bit about that aspect of it. What litigation is going on in your respective states, and what litigation do you hope to see brought in the near future? We'll go to Mary Sue.
Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, there's only two ways to get the laws changed, and that's through the legislature or through a lawsuit. So we're lucky here. We have Richard Gladden, and he takes a heartfelt interest in these issues, and he just loves a good fight. So he's filed some litigation for us. We have not been real successful. And I believe a lot of it is we're here in the Fifth Circuit. It's not a good place to be. But we do have one called Hearn that is going, we petitioned the Supreme Court. We don't hold out any hope that they'll hear it, but you never know. I mean,
I do.
You do
I hold out hope.
if you do nothing, you get nothing. So we're moving ahead with it, and what it basically her involves. And I'm oh my God. Okay, so I'm really good at legislative stuff. I'm terrible at legal stuff. Terrible. Poor Richard, he'll have to explain something to me 10 times, and then I still don't get it. So what I can say very simply about the Hearn case is that we have a lot of members who years ago took a plea deal for probation before there was even a registry. And their court paperwork said that they didn't say anything about registering. In one case, it said the man had to register for 10 years only while he was on probation. So these men finished their sentences, they completed their sentences, they fulfilled their part of the contract. But then the state came back when the laws changed, stuck them back on the registry for life. So the Hearn goes after them in that way, in that this was a contract, this was a signed deal between these men, one by one, and the state. And the state just can't renege on the deal. So that's where we're at with Hearn. And of course, we would love to file all kinds of lawsuits. I mean, we've got a list, and I wish that we had more attorneys that would really step up. I mean, you guys in California are really lucky to have Janice and Chance. Very lucky. And I feel like we're real lucky to have Richard. Illinois is lucky to have Adele. But gosh, we need like 50 more of them, 50 more attorneys like them that are willing to help, not because it's profitable, but because it's the right thing to do and because they have a passion for helping the underdog. So, we're always on the lookout for that. And, not to bring religion into this, but God sends us what we need. So I'm not going to stress about it. I think we're doing pretty well over here on the litigation. Thank you guys. And on to you, Amber.
So, again, I am really in awe of, some of the litigation that's going on around the country. There's been a lot of great work, and I have to say you are very lucky to have Janice and Richard and Adele, working on these issues. Richard is so smart. Like, he blows my mind sometimes. But in terms of, what we're doing, we have an amazing attorney, Jill Sanders, who leads our litigation team. And so recently what we have done is not necessarily a lawsuit, but we did file an amicus brief for a petition for writ with the Supreme Court in a case called Ortiz v. Breslin. And Mary Sue, I'm a little bit like you in terms of the legal guns need to explain things to me in further detail many times, but kind of the long and short of it is that this case deals with the idea that people are being held past their dates in prison because they cannot find parole eligible housing. And in the state of New York, the state is actually obligated by statute to provide housing to people if they're homeless in the city. And so these laws are really kind of conflicting. And so they're just basically asking the Supreme Court to consider that because obviously it's unconstitutional. So we did file an amicus brief with the help of Janice, who helped us so much in terms of getting that done. And so that's what we have worked on in terms of litigation. The other things that we have looked at is in New York, we have a tiered registry and a law enforcement only registry. So we're looking into some considerations around people who are on a law enforcement only registry that have local police departments have publish their information in their own little mini registries on their own websites and things like that. So we're looking into taking some action around that. And then last but not least, in terms of what we're considering when legislation is passed. So in the instance that in Connecticut, they do pass a path off with a huge carve out for people based on their conviction date, we would be looking to look at legislative intent through that process to bring litigation after the fact, because we feel that that's unconstitutional. So those are kind of the things that we've been doing. And again, very new organization, but we are very fortunate to have some great legal minds working with us.
Here in Illinois, I have been actively and for a very long time litigating on behalf of people who are on supervision or parole after having been convicted of a sex offense. So that takes a couple of forms. One is something very similar to what Amber was talking about, which is we have 2 class action lawsuits against the Illinois Department of Corrections on behalf of people who simply cannot get out of prison because they cannot obtain housing that complies with all of the restrictions. The first case is called Murphy versus Madigan, or Murphy versus Rowell now, because we have a new attorney general. And that case, if you were at the 2019 ACSOL conference, I gave a keynote address about, but it was in its infancy then. You know, we had just kind of gotten judgment in our favor and we were looking at what would happen next. And that case is still going now. There's a federal injunction in place on behalf of everyone who's been sentenced to an indeterminate amount of mandatory supervised release time. And the court found in that case that it was violation of the Equal Protection Clause in the 8th Amendment to keep people imprisoned indefinitely simply because they're too poor to afford housing that complies with all of these restrictions. We are making progress, but it is an enormously time-consuming, unglamorous, tedious type of work we have to do now, which is just very granular, working with registrants and their families and not-for-profits, and just finding the places where folks can go, advocating vigorously for all the people who are in those positions. We filed a companion case to Murphy when we felt that our progress on getting people out of prison was too slow, to challenge one specific housing restriction that we thought was perhaps one of the biggest barriers to people actually getting out of prison, which was, in addition to being restricted from living 500 feet from schools, playgrounds, and daycares, folks were also restricted from living at the same address as one another while they're on parole. So even if there was a not-for-profit or a church or a charity that would be willing to help someone with housing, or a halfway house or a shelter that would be willing to take persons with sex offense convictions, only one person could go to that address. Likewise, if there was a landlord who was willing to give people a chance while they were on parole, even if he owned a 100-unit building that was in a location that complies with all of the restrictions on where folks are allowed to live, only one person could be at that address. During the pandemic, with it spreading rapidly within jails and prisons, we thought this is just unacceptable. So we filed a second case to challenge that restriction on behalf of someone who had a good place to go, but for there being another registrant already at the address. And thankfully, we recently had success in that case too. That law was found unconstitutional, but now we're working towards getting a permanent injunction in place there so that it's not enforced anymore. So that's been a huge part of our litigation effort in Illinois. We're also working on some cases about the restrictions that apply once someone is out of prison and on mandatory supervised release. So we have a parole rule that says no contact with minors, but that is also applied by the Illinois Department of Corrections to people having contact with their own children. So we're litigating the constitutionality of restrictions that are imposed on registrants being able to maintain their relationships with their own sons and daughters while they're on parole. We also have a restriction on internet access for folks who are on parole that we're challenging the constitutionality of. And then I'll mention just one more, even though there's lots of litigation going on, which is we have a small category of people in Illinois who are only required to register for 10 years. But we have an aspect of the law that says if you violate your registration requirement or any aspect of it during that 10 years, it will automatically be extended for another 10 years. But The way the extensions work is that basically someone in state police has sole and unreviewable discretion to extend registration if they so much as get a report from a police officer that someone registered late. And the registrant him or herself has no opportunity to contest the truthfulness of the violation. Even if the person is criminally charged and they're not convicted, or the state drops the case, or they're found not guilty, it doesn't matter. It will still be extended for 10 years. So we're challenging the constitutionality of that too. So I've mostly listed cases that are either ongoing or where we've had some success, but of course there's tremendous challenges with doing this kind of work too. And there's certainly been some setbacks, like the Fifth Circuit. Here in the Seventh Circuit, we have a tremendous number of very conservative judges, many who were appointed to the court during the last presidential administration. And those judges just have, they're unfavorable to us in a couple of ways. One is that they have a narrower view of what the Constitution actually touches than perhaps more liberal judges do. And then moreover, they feel very deferential towards state lawmakers and what kinds of laws they can pass. And so they're much more likely to uphold these laws when they're challenged on that basis. So we struggle here like everywhere else, but we're keeping up the fight and keeping up the hope. All right, want to switch to another topic here, which is we've talked about legislation, litigation that are being done in our respective organizations. What about just more general support and education that you provide to members in your organizations or people who support your organizations? Mary Sue?
So here in Texas, we have the way that I communicate with all of our members is through an email group. We use a program called MailChimp, and I send them an invite if they're interested in joining after screening them to make sure that there's someone who should be in the email group. And then I send out emails all the time. Sometimes I send out too many emails, which is during the legislative session. But I always try to keep everybody updated because that's the only way really to keep in touch with everybody. There's so many of us, I can't just call. So I send out email updates all the time. If I need help, I ask for help. And then we do have support groups. We have in some of the major cities, we have one in San Antonio, one in Austin, one in Houston, one in Dallas, and we will probably be starting one in Fort Worth. And the members can go, and we don't put that information on our website. That goes out in an email to our members so that they can go and feel safe and not feel like a news station's going to show up or something like that. But the support groups work out real well. They connect, they get to know each other, they can vent, they don't have to talk about their offenses, they can bitch, they can cry, they can talk about their successes, they can lift up others, make friends, make connections. They're great groups. I wish I could travel a lot. I would go to all of them. So that's what we do here in Texas. We have our support groups. Other than that, we try to connect people with each other. For instance, we have a really good member who is, her son was in the federal system. And we have another man who was in the federal system. So when I get calls from families who have a loved one in the federal system and they have 100 questions, I've already got permission to send them to this man and this lady so that they can talk to her and him and find out, some of the little details that they really want to know. So we just try and connect people with other members and try and hook them up and get them the support they need. And everyone needs support, even me. So anyway, Amber, to you, girlfriend.
Thanks so much. So here again, we're a small organization and we're developing things, but one of the programs that has been super successful and we're very excited about is our, similar to your support groups, is our restorative peer support circles. Because we kind of started during the pandemic, everything has been Zoom based with a call-in option for those who have restrictions. But we use kind of the container of restorative circles and restorative practices to run those groups. So they're a little bit more structured than just kind of, getting together and chatting. But we found that there's some really deep connection that is happening in those groups. We have currently have one that's going. We have another group that is growing, and so people can just go on our website. They fill out a form, and then of course there's a vetting process to talk to them to make sure that they're placed in the appropriate circle. So those circles are again a really great resource. The other thing that we have is we gather information and resource. So, places around employment or the, housing and things like that. So, when we get those phone calls, we're able to point people in the right direction. So those are the kind of things that we're doing in terms of support.
Here in Illinois, we have launched kind of a new program where we're trying to do quarterly educational sessions on topics that are significant to our members. So we had our first one just maybe a month or two ago now over the summer, where we talked about discrimination in jobs. And so there was a rather favorable new Illinois law that was passed that created a process whereby employers really aren't supposed to conduct a background check until after they've offered someone an offer of employment. So we held a session with two really expert employment lawyers to explain to our members how they can use this law, what the best practices are for applying for jobs and availing themselves of the new protections that were available under this change in the law. So I think that was useful to our members. We're planning another one about housing laws, what protections they have from discrimination in rental agreements under Illinois and federal law. And we're working on putting that together, and we hope to do more of these sessions in the future. So that's been enjoyable. Before we go to our last topics, I saw Janice had a raised hand, and so I will ask her to chime in.
Adele, I'm looking at the clock and seeing you don't have a whole lot of time. 3 minutes left on the panel, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. So I think I heard you say that in Illinois, you're fighting against access to social media. And I'm just wondering, how can that be when we've got a U.S. Supreme Court decision that says that can't be?
Yeah. So the question is whether Packingham, the U.S. Supreme Court decision, extends to folks who are currently under criminal justice supervision. And there was mixed stuff out there about it. And the Department of Corrections has taken the position that, well, we can still restrict it until somebody gets permission from their therapist to have access to the internet. We don't think it's right, but there's still an argument there, and that's still ongoing. So I know we're very short on time, but I did want us to just touch on the last question that we had on our list, which was, what gives you hope when doing this work? We faced so many challenges and lots of opposition. What makes you feel hopeful about continuing on this path? Mary Sue?
I have times in my life when I'm not very hopeful, but then I look back. When I started, this was 13 years ago. And there were very few advocates out there, very few. And I mean, the first 2 or 3 conferences I attended were not even advertised on any website. It was a really underground kind of secret advocacy work. I didn't even realize that the very few people that I had met, nobody was even using their real name. I'd been talking and emailing to a few people on the phone and emails, and I didn't find out 2 years later that wasn't even their name. I'm like, what the hell? But I mean, it was so taboo, and people were so afraid. There weren't even any professionals speaking out. Nobody was speaking out. So when I started, that's the way it was. And now I look and oh my gosh, there's ACSOL, there's other groups out there, there's all of these great research papers coming out, a lot of people speaking out. And I look back to back then and it's like, wow, it is a huge, I mean, it may have taken some time, but it is a huge difference between now and 13 years ago. So I look forward to seeing what's going to come up in the future.
Amber?
So I have to say, what gives me hope is people. I mean, the people that are involved in this work and the people that I've met through this work. To Mary Sue's point, these conversations are different than they were even 4 years ago. There was a hesitation to even have conversations. And so, this work is moving along, and we have the research, we have the people that are, really willing to speak up. We can always use more, but at this juncture and this time in history, it's very, very hopeful. So I think it's the people who are willing to share their lived experience, share their stories, that give me the most hope.
I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, meeting people who are affected by these laws and talking to them about how they persevere and how they go on to have positive, productive lives, even with all of these challenges, gives me great hope. And then connecting with you, connecting with other people who are doing this work, hearing from Janice, hearing from the other advocates who are working on these issues, gives me great hope that we can't be stopped. If we all just keep our heads down, keep working on the parts of it that we can change, I really do believe that our efforts in combination will get us there to where we know we need to be in the future. So I think we are out of time for our session. I'm very grateful that you all joined us. I'm going to drop my email in the chat for people who do have Illinois-specific questions. You can feel free to direct them to me. I did see a couple in the chat, and I'm happy to talk to you more, but we'll do it offline. So I'm just going to drop my email there for you.
All right. Well, thank you, Adele, for that wonderful presentation, to Mary Sue and to Amber as well. It's great to hear what's going on in other states and to know that you all are making such significant progress. So hang in there. We are, in fact, making a difference. And I know sometimes it seems like it's a steep uphill climb, but quite frankly, it's worth it. So having said that, folks, it's time for the lunch break. And if you would come back at 12:30, which is in about 40 minutes or so, we'll have a plenary session, another plenary session. And Chance Oberstein and I will be talking about the tiered registry law that was passed here 3 years ago and has now become effective. And we have information that's even, I think, relevant to folks who live in other states. So again, thank you for this panel. I hope everybody noticed that there are 3 beautiful women on this panel. And why is it that beautiful women are attracted to become executive directors? Well, I don't know, but the fact is we can all enjoy it. So thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Janice. Bye. Bye,
Thank you,
y'all.
Janice. Thank you, everyone.